Welcome, everyone, to Stepping Into Your Leadership. I'm your host, Christine Courtney. Our goal here is to give you some actionable takeaways that will help you lead your teams. Thanks for joining us on this leadership journey. Let's get started. Welcome back to Stepping Into Your Leadership. I'm your host, Christine Courtney, and today it's pretty exciting because we're going to take a deeper dive into what I think is one of the most powerful leadership models out there. It's called Situational Leadership. If you have not heard of it, look it up. There's a lot of information on it. We're going to give you some good tips here and techniques. If you haven't listened to part 1 of when we introduced this, I highly recommend it. So go back and check out part 1. In that episode, basically, I introduced the 4 leadership styles and how they apply to different team members based on their level of competence and commitment. So the idea is that you don't have necessarily your own leadership style that you have to have at all times, but that it is situational based on people that you're directing or coaching or supporting or delegating, where they are in the moment and what the situation is for them. And the reason that I like that so much is that it has everything to do with who you're leading and less to do about everybody else switching to who you are as the boss. So I have found it highly helpful in my career and also in helping others, teach them tools and techniques to immediately have some influence in very powerful ways with folks that they work with. So we're going to go beyond those basics today. I asked our producer, Tatiana Dominguez, to join me today. Tatiana and I have worked together for a long time. And so she knows a lot of this stuff from us having done it with folks that we work with. And so I invite her to ask some clarifying questions about it, challenge me a little bit on real world applications, and help us break down really some of the toughest aspects of putting situational leadership into practice. It's a great theory. It looks great on paper. People love it because it's a really nice framework. But if you're not actually putting it into practice, then it can just stay as kind of an intellectual exercise. And I'm much more interested in like the practice of being a good leader, because you can study all you want, but unless you're practicing this stuff every day, you're not getting any better at it. So understanding the model is one thing. Actually doing it in your day to day is the tricky part. And hopefully we can give you some tips here to make it a little easier. So welcome, Tatiana.
Hi.
Hi. So you know a little bit about situational leadership, and without overthinking it, I'd love for you to ask me some questions about what you think, and hopefully I can help people out there who are maybe just trying it or want to get the confidence to try it or have tried it and are struggling in certain aspects.
Yeah, it's so funny because this week we're doing it in the lab. And so I was just like, oh, it's so interesting to hear people's questions. And so my first thought was like, how do people practice this without overthinking it? So funny you said use the word overthinking.
Okay, so let's just explain to people what the lab is, first of all. It sounds like we have a very scientific lab. So we do. We have something called the Leadership Learning Lab, which we love. It's an online 8-week boot camp for managers and rising leaders. And it's great program, and we do an intense 1.5 hours every week for 8 weeks on the things that we think are kind of the most critical to managing people well. And so that's when we talk about the lab, that's what we're talking about. And if you also by the chance want to check it out, you can go online. We'll put all the information in the show notes, but it's also starting a new cohort up in May, and we have about 3 cohorts a year. So if you want to get on the waiting list for that, do it pretty soon. But it's a great way to get some coaching and work in small groups on this stuff. So I love that it's coming up in the lab. And so I love that you're bringing questions from that. So yeah. So how do you do this without overthinking it? That's a great question. So I think the key is really starting small. Like you don't have to completely overhaul your leadership style in one night, right? Instead, maybe don't apply it to everyone at once, but like, let's just pick one direct report. And typically the one that you want to start with is in most people's minds is they want to immediately get a solution to their problem. So they generally pick the person that they're having the most trouble with. And so that's really good to do. I would say that it's also natural. So think about the person who is your most difficult direct report. And maybe you have good relationships with all of them, but they can get better. I have seen that to be true. They can get better using this model as well. And you can either do it with them knowing you're doing it, or you can do it without them knowing it. Either way, it works. So one of the things I would say is let's pick one direct report. And let's say that they're a disillusioned learner, because that is typically where we start to see problems, right? We generally, when someone starts the first style or the first area that we see person in is that enthusiastic beginner. Kind of the developmental model for the first box is when they come into a new role or new company, they typically are an enthusiastic beginner. That's really fun. We love people. That's the honeymoon stage. That's when everybody's excited and like a go-getter, and maybe they have low competence, meaning that they don't know the company or they don't know this job yet, but their commitment is super high. And by commitment, as a reminder to people, I mean their confidence and their motivation is really high. And so we love that role because they're really self-motivated is how we would describe them often in that role. But there doesn't seem to be a lot of times much issue there, although there can be sometimes if they seem to be slow to picking up stuff. And I would tell you that the mistake that people make in that enthusiastic beginner role over and over and over again is that their style that we use is coaching. And the coaching style is the style that most people really like. And the coaching style is one where you're like very enthusiastic also, and you're helping to pump them up and support them. And we think of ourselves in an idealized way of being that kind of leader, right? We've seen all those movies where that coach is giving that inspirational speech or pumping them up on the sidelines, or maybe we came from team sports where we felt that kind of commitment from a coach. However, if you use that too early, then you can get into a little bit of a sticky wicket because they need more direction. Remember, their competence is low in that first box and they really want to get good, and they don't need your motivation then. What they need is you to be building their competence, and building their competence is very different skills than building their commitment. So building their competence is really about like, how can I tell you exactly what needs to be done? How can I show you all the pitfalls? How can I tell you this is the way we do things here? Try this first before you reinvent the wheel, right? Try this first, get competent at it. And then later, when you have ideas of how to innovate this, fantastic. But let's get your competence up so that you can do a lot of this stuff without me constantly directing you. It's a self-preservation technique too, because otherwise it's a lot to direct. But most people like that enthusiastic beginner role because of the motivation of the person. I think what the disillusioned learner is where we start to get worried, because that is really when, as the manager, you need to kick into coaching mode. And that's where you need to give them those powerful speeches. That's when you need to catch them doing something right. That's when you need to build their confidence a little bit by saying, I know it feels like you're not learning this stuff fast enough, but from my perspective, this is where I'm seeing your growth. Like pointing out the positive things for them. Because now, when you don't know what you don't know, you feel pretty confident. But once you start seeing how much you have to learn and, oh, am I ever going to get this? Your confidence starts to dwindle. And our role then is to help boost that kind of confidence and motivation for them when it's starting to go down. And we have to remember that this stage is normal. A lot of times what I see is that people will say to me, I think I made the wrong hire. Or they tricked me. I thought they were really enthusiastic, but now they're not. They're terrible. They're the wrong person. And they start thinking, I got to get them out of this role. They're not who I thought they were. And whilst maybe sometimes that's true, I would say that the best thing to do for them and for you as a leader is to try this coaching style and see if you can still be highly directive, meaning that you're giving them exactly what they should do, but also adding that lots of sprinkles of high supportive behavior. And what I see happen is that we like to do the supportive behavior, but oftentimes we do not give people highly directive behavior because we're scared about being a micromanager.
I like what you're saying, Christine, because I think just to bring it back to the actual tip that you said was to try it with one person, because that seems so much more manageable than trying to change how you lead with everyone. It might be so overwhelming to just try to change how you're leading with everyone, and you might be putting people in the wrong places.
Yeah. So I think what you're alluding to is that we usually in our classes have people create these grids, right? So imagine everybody at home, you have 4 boxes, right? And on the top 2 boxes are high support, and on the bottom 2 boxes are lower support. And on the far right is high in direction, and the far left is low in direction. So on the bottom right quadrant is style 1, which is directing for an enthusiastic beginner. The top right is Style 2 is coaching for the disillusioned learner. Style 3, which is on the top left, is a supporting or facilitating mode. And that's for your capable but cautious contributor. And on the bottom left is your delegating style of leadership. And that's for your self-reliant achiever. So what we have people do that Tatiana is talking about is we ask people to take in pencil, because these things change. They are never in pen. We are hopefully moving through this like a cycle. We ask people to take all of their direct reports and pencil in where we think they are developmentally right now, and then look at their leadership style for each one of those. And so some people that we work with have maybe, 5 to 10 direct reports. And so when they're putting them all in these boxes, they're like, oh my God, I'm doing all 4 styles. And potentially you are. If you have 4 people, there's a good chance that they're not all in the same box at the same time. Even if they started at the same time in the same position, doesn't matter, right? People move at different paces. So go ahead and start by maybe putting everybody where you think they might be in pencil, so you can erase it when you realize something different. And then pick the one that you want to try this with and just take baby steps to try based on that.
Yeah, and I think what's important about what you said is that people are moving. It's a cycle. Mm-hmm. And potentially people are in different parts for different parts of their job.
Yes.
People can be in different parts of the quad, the cycle, based on different aspects of their job or responsibility. They're getting new responsibilities. They're transferring responsibilities.
True. That's where the term situational comes from, right? Like, what's the situation that they're in? So somebody could, for instance, be promoted or given new responsibilities in one area, and they could be highly competent. They could be completely a self-reliant achiever. We see this a lot. And then, so we give them more. And then we assume that by giving them totally new responsibilities, they're going to continue to be a self-reliant achiever because that's who they are. When in fact, these are all developmental modes, and it has nothing to do with who the person is or how good a person they are. It has everything to do with where they are developmentally. And so when you give them this promotion, or when you give them this new added aspect to their job, they become an enthusiastic beginner for that portion of their job. The tasks that they've been doing for a while, they continue to stay a self-reliant achiever, and you can keep delegating to them. But all the new stuff you're giving them, you better spend some time directing them again, which is going to feel awkward to you because you have such a different relationship with this person at this point. And so I really recommend with those folks that you explain it to them while you're doing it, so that they don't go, what, does she not trust me all of a sudden? Like, she usually is very hands off. Why all of a sudden not with this new thing? Does she not believe I can do it? So you want to kind of get that out of the way. And for instance, with you, Tatiana, who is very much for most of the work that you do a self-reliant achiever, and I've been delegating to you for years. If I was giving you something that's completely new, like accounting or something like that, there would be a need for both of us to go, wait a minute, we need to have some very clear direction on this and go back to kind of beginner points, and to be able to say that to you ahead of time and say, listen, this is what we're going to have to do. Like, I'm going to have to be a little more directive than usual because I want you to be able to pick this up as fast as possible, because I know you're going to want to get to that self-reliant achiever and do it on your own very quickly without me getting in your way as much as possible. And so I'm going to be highly directive in the beginning, but hopefully it'll be for a very short period of time.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, in that example, is that it's different to do the actual task than leading a task, because it's so different of like, I'm offering support, but potentially I might not be an expert in the task, where my job is to lead and make sure people have support, but not that I'm necessarily the expert. Yeah. And so when I'm being asked to be the expert, that is when I need to be learning as much as possible.
Yeah. So it's a little bit of a learning curve for everybody, and I think if we can acknowledge that nobody has to be perfect, nobody has to really have this down, that, that us as leaders, we're so afraid to seem like we don't know what we're doing. When in fact, if we could just sometimes say to people like, hey, listen, I'm trying this out, and I believe in you and I believe in myself, but this part of it is new to me too. But you have to have a high level of trust with each other to do that. You have to have a strong relationship.
Yeah, it's true. I'll put in the notes a link to a Building Trust episode that we had, so that people can get a sense of that too. Yeah. But I wanted to switch gears just to talk about the common mistakes people make trying to implement situational leaders. What are some of the biggest ways leaders get this wrong? Yeah,
I would say definitely the most common mistake is delegating too soon. We are told, and you're probably, to be fair to those leaders, oftentimes you're smushed in the middle between your bosses and the people beneath you. And a branch breaks in the middle, right? That's the weakest part because you're being pushed on both sides. And so oftentimes from above, we're being told, delegate, delegate. You have to delegate. Part of leadership is delegating. You're not going to be able to handle all this work. You've got to delegate it. That's why we hired this person, on and so forth. And what we're finding is that I find that people have this enthusiastic beginner and they're like, great, finally somebody that can take over some of my work. And we're waiting as long as we possibly can. And sometimes it's just way too quick. And we go to just delegating to them before they're ready for that developmentally. And then when they fail, because they're human and they will, and it's a lot to be delegated to, especially when you're new at something or you haven't gone through the rest of those developmental steps, then when you fail at something, even if it's small, we start to, as bosses, we lose trust in them. And then we start withholding and we start not delegating or we take things away. And then that's where the relationship really starts to degrade quickly. And you potentially have started to lose a really good employee because those employees don't like that feeling either. So they tend to start looking around or seeing, maybe I need to work for somebody else, or I need to go somewhere else, or, or I feel terrible, or I don't feel confident, or I don't feel like I can do this here. And so people don't like that feeling. And so you tend to lose people quicker. Whereas if you just would have waited, it could take a long time to delegate. But hopefully if you do it right, then you've got somebody that's going to stick with you for a long time, feel a real sense of true empowerment of this project or this task or this, I own this. This is mine. I feel committed to this, so that it's no longer yours and you're not delegating it, but it's theirs. And then they can really shine and make it something pretty remarkable. But if you go straight from enthusiastic beginner to thinking they're a self-reliant achiever, you will fail every time. So I would say that instead of jumping straight to that, spend more time in the coaching phase, the supporting phase, giving encouragement, starting once they start showing more competence, more understanding of things. You can start asking them open-ended questions, asking them how they would innovate this, gradually increasing autonomy as you start to see that it can do it. And also one tip is that if you have a gut feeling that they're ready to be delegated to, or if you just have to, like you're just completely overwhelmed and you have a feeling like, okay, this is my best bet for somebody that can be delegated to, I would start with something really, really insignificant because it's practice. It's practice of delegating for both of you, and start with something that when they fail or they make a mistake or they trip up, which, chances are they will, because either you didn't set it up clearly or they're just learning something new. It's just like, think of a kid when they're learning something, they don't do it perfectly the first time, right? So give them something that's not your most important client or isn't going to sink the company if they mess this up, right? But that's something potentially very small and very somewhat insignificant to you, but it's something that you can practice delegating on. Because most of the time in delegation, I find that the leader is the one who's making the most mistakes because of how they're setting up the delegation. They're not really prepared for it and they're not setting it up for success.
Well, it just makes me think of people who think they're delegating, but really they're micromanaging.
So what do you mean?
I just mean like, I've given up this task, but in the meantime, I am telling you what to do at every single step. So I'm not really supporting you. I'm not really.
Yeah. And so you can see that already in the words that you use. Like they're giving highly directive behavior. Right? And highly directed behavior comes from styles 1 and 2, which is basically for a beginner. And so if you treat someone who's a self-reliant achiever as a beginner, they're going to get real upset real fast. And they want to have low direction, because if you're a self-reliant achiever, you don't get your sense of confidence anymore or commitment from what your boss says to you all the time. You get it from yourself, like a strong sense of self and a strong sense of like owning things and making stuff happen. You also get it from your colleagues and people looking at you going, okay, she's a badass, or all right, that's awesome, or he's great. You get your sense of confidence and commitment from that, and even sometimes from people that work for you. But your boss's word becomes much less critical as it does in those first 2 styles when you're a beginner or when you're learning. I also think when people are complaining about micromanaging, they're really complaining about that idea of skipping, that idea of coaching, that idea of like helping somebody still build competence, but also having very supportive behavior along the way, right? That piece of it is really critical. And also, honestly, so is that style 3, which is for your capable but cautious contributors as well. Like those are where you need to start asking them more questions and getting them to feel comfortable with risk taking and facilitating. Well, what do you think we should do when they come to you for every question? All those 2 steps, coaching and supporting, are critical to getting you to a place where you're not micromanaging them, where they're starting to own things. But that it's very difficult for them to do it if they don't have the confidence, which you build in the coaching style for those disillusioned learners, and 2, the risk taking, which they need when they become capable but cautious contributors. And so those 2 things of confidence building and encouraging risk taking, hugely important in terms of getting somebody ready to delegate. They have to be okay with failure.
What about the manager that just disappears? They give you a task and then you don't see them, for weeks.
Yeah. And sometimes they swoop in and take back the project in a last minute panic of like, oh my God, I thought this was happening. I knew I shouldn't have delegated this to you, whatever. I like to call that seagull leadership, where they like come in and like swoop in and take your sandwich at the very last minute on the beach, that kind of, that feels terrible. Like, wait, why'd you eat my hot dog or whatever?
My sandwich.
Your sandwich, right? But this idea of when you go away, what often happens is that as the leader, we feel like, okay, I've finally delegated that. And oftentimes it may seem like we're going away, but we're often doing other things, right? Or helping somebody else or trying to figure out a bigger project or something maybe we've been delegated to and are overwhelmed with a task we've been given. And so we kind of just move it off our plate really quickly. And when we do that and we go away for weeks, often we think that the person feels like we've built a strong enough relationship to come to us if they're struggling with something. But sometimes in the mind of those folks, because they aren't quite yet a self-reliant achiever, they're not ready for that kind of low direction and low support. And so they kind of go through a struggle of their own, and they're maybe afraid to tell you about it. I heard a story recently with somebody who was given a pretty big project to do for a cover of a book, and it was a new person, right? And he really needed more coaching. And what they did was they delegated it to him, the boss, thinking that he was ready for this, and did what we often do, what we would want, which is to be given a project and leave the person alone and trust that they're going to hit those deadlines. But we don't remember that that's not how we started. And so he gave this book cover assignment to somebody, which is a pretty big assignment for a new person right out of college. And this person then started to have real lack of confidence and started questioning, oh, I don't think I can use this style that they want me to do. I don't think I know the computer program well enough. And what happens when we suffer from that kind of low confidence is we just start, especially if you're young, we just start avoiding it. We avoid having the conversation about it. We're nervous about letting somebody down. And so what happens is we just ignore it. And then the deadline passes and we didn't make the deadline and we think, oh, okay, well, maybe I'll just get fired from that job and that's okay because I wasn't really ready to deal with that anyway. Instead of just being able to be like, what's happening, And in this case, he really didn't have the confidence to even tell the boss, like, listen, I'm not going to make this deadline. I'm not confident in using this style or this program. And when somebody else intervened to explain that to the boss, he was like, oh my God, I don't care if he uses that style. I don't care if he uses that program. What programs is he comfortable with? Like, let's bring him in, talk to what he's comfortable with, and let's start over. Right. And then the young person could go, oh, okay. But we make a lot of assumptions, especially if they're new to jobs or new to the work, that they're going to immediately come talk to you. A lot of times, they could be a really good person, a really talented person, but there may just be needing a lot more coaching and a lot more hand holding to get them ready. So maybe you're not going to be delegating that cover of that book now. Maybe you're going to help coach them through it. And maybe the next time they'll be more capable because they've gone through the process, but maybe they're a little more cautious about risk taking. So now you become more supportive, which is style 3. And then maybe you're ready for full delegation a couple times in. But this thought that people are going to be ready right away, it's just not realistic. I mean, if anybody's been a parent, you know this from raising children, right? But we're much more kind to our own children often than we are to our employees. And sometimes, good leadership, I don't say this a lot, good leadership, good management is good teaching. It's good parenting. It's all of those things help to look at how people evolve, how people learn, how people get better at something.
I think there's something so interesting in what you said there. I think the term delegating, the book cover, like just to use your story as an example, you can still assign to please do this book cover to someone and it not be delegating. And it's still supporting. Like you can still have that task be anywhere in the quadrant. And I think that's where people get confused, is that they think, oh, I can't delegate this to someone because they can't take the whole thing on. And it's just like, yeah, that might be true, but you could put them somewhere else and they can still do the task with a different situation or the different questions that you might have.
Right. You're more involved in it. You're more involved in that process along the way. And by the way, this never changes. I mean, Tatiana, with you and I, we've worked together for, more than a decade. And the reality
20 years in
2
April.
decades. Yeah. I don't like to admit I'm that old, but, yeah, I always think of you as so young, but yeah, it's true. Like even we've been working together for a long time. Many, many things are completely delegated to you in your area, right? And I trust you'll come to me with things, but there are times within that it slides into other areas where you're doing something new also. And I need to be like, okay, I can see that she's more cautious here, or she's less confident in making these decisions. And it doesn't say anything bad about where Tatiana is. It says that she needs me, that I may not know either, but at least like I can be there alongside her, spotting as if we were in the gym lifting weights. And I'm here. I got you, girl. Like we're together here on this, because I know eventually she's going to feel more confidence or feel more competence and feel like, okay, I got that. I know the way. Right. And it's important to be there.
I think that's another part of the building trust thing of make sure you're building relationships with your employees so that you're getting to know them and that you're building trust. Because I think when your employees feel like they can come talk to you if they're feeling unsure about something, or they have questions, or they need support, that they know that you can do that. And that's, just to plug the power of the check-in.
Yeah.
As a thing, making sure that you're doing your check-ins, your weekly check-ins with your employees as a routine, so that they know they always have a chance to talk to you and things don't get too out of whack where they haven't had a chance to talk to you in weeks.
Yeah.
Because, whatever's been happening.
Yeah. And that's really why those weekly one-on-ones are so key. It's funny. There's a lot of stuff in the news these days about, I think Airbnb guy, stopped one-on-ones for all of his executive team and so forth. And, of course, when someone does something like that, everyone thinks, oh, that's the way we should go. And I want to be like, all right, let's check back in with them in a few months, because my experience, even with folks that I've worked with for a long time, you've got to have the dedicated time for people. And maybe you don't need as much time. They do need some sort of support or some sort of check-in because of this. Even if they're great people, we're human. And so we're going to slide into different areas and need different things from our bosses at different times.
I wanted to switch gears just because I'm aware of our time. Your first tip was to start with one person. So let's say, okay, now I'm in the mix. What happens when a leader has a mix of people at different levels? One person needs coaching, one person needs directing, another person is at the delegation stage. How does someone handle that? What should they be doing?
Well, that's what's so exciting to me about this model, is because before you put this on paper, the feeling inside you as a leader is overwhelmed. And I'll just say me, for example, I would be feeling overwhelmed. I would be losing sleep. I would be thinking, I don't know where my folks are. I don't know what's happening. I feel like I'm not a good leader. I feel like I'm not giving them what they need. That's the feeling of a little bit overwhelmed. What I love when I see when we do this on paper is when you actually physically make these 4 quadrants and you actually make yourself commit to writing down somebody's name in those quadrants, it immediately starts to get some breath and relaxation in your brain, because then you can start to tackle it and you can go, okay, let's start with one person. And then when you start practicing it, and it's not like you're focused on this person all day, it's just a couple of touch points a day where you're doing, let's say, some coaching, right? If you've identified that they're a disillusioned learner. So you've identified some points where you're pointing out to them, highly attentive to what they're doing. So noticing things, telling them, I see you doing this. That's really great. Or I know that this may be frustrating, or how are you feeling right now? Like, let's talk about that because I see some growth here, even though I know it can not feel like it. Sometimes the number one thing I'll say to somebody who's in a disillusioned learner space is I'll say to them, it's okay that you feel this way. It takes 1 year. You will not be completely feeling confident in this job for 1 year. You have to go through an entire cycle. And that's how it was for us, because so often our work happened within over a school year cycle for a lot of our business. And so that was something that I say, unless you've seen the whole cycle, of course you're not confident. You haven't done it before. And that time frame would give people would relax them a little bit and go, oh, okay, I'm still new. Because a lot of times a year is a long time, especially if you're a young person. So I would say that feeling of just writing down those names are there. Sometimes people ask me, should I just guess or should I ask them? And I would say that it depends, right? Depending on sometimes people feel confident enough to say, hey, I learned this framework called situational leadership in my leadership class. And I would not share with them where I put them, by the way, first. I would just say, these are the different categories. And where do you think that you are right now, knowing that this is a continuum and that we all have to go through these spaces? Because what'll happen is someone will look at this, and if they're a type A person, they're going to say immediately that they're a level 4 self-reliant achiever, because that's who they feel like as a person, right? That's their identity. But in fact, they may be an enthusiastic beginner or a disillusioned learner or a capable but cautious contributor and not realize it because they haven't taken the whole class, right? So you can give them say, hey, listen to these podcasts or watch these YouTube things and see what you think, where you would be and how I can help support you. And that would be interesting. You don't have to completely go by what they say. You just listen to what they have to say, and it may sway you, but it kind of depends on how good they are at self-awareness too, to know this, right? So anyway, you can listen, you can ask them if you feel comfortable. If not, you can just take a guess. You'll watch them and start to learn, oh, wait, maybe I'm wrong, or maybe they've moved. And the hope is that because of your coaching and because of your leadership and your ability to flex to their developmental mode, hopefully they are moving. You're going to take your pencil and you're going to erase them in the disillusioned learner phase and say, oh, they're now a capable but cautious contributor. I can see that now they're way more competent. They know this job better. They're just a little nervous about taking some risks.
Yeah, I think what's interesting, I don't know that I would feel comfortable asking someone where they were, because it's so much to explain. And
I know.
But, it's interesting just using the Leadership Learning Lab as an example. What's interesting about being, having sat in this week is the people having an opportunity to kind of lay out who their people are, and then kind of the group deciding where they might be, just because you might feel just a little bit more confident in asking someone else their opinion, right? Especially someone that's learning with you or is an expert. So I might go that route of like, oh, this is what I'm thinking, to someone else, like my boss, to see if they have a sense of what they might be, who they might be.
Yeah, because the other thing we do is we have people not only put in pencil their people that directly report to them, but you can put in yourself. Like, where do you think you are? And like you said, Tatiana, it may be situational. It may be depending on the task that you're working on, right? There are certain tasks of yours, let's say, where you're highly confident. You're like, I got this, right? Leave me alone. And then there's things where you're like, I'm feeling like a little bit now like a disillusioned learner in this space, or I'm feeling pretty enthusiastic about taking on this new thing. It just depends, right? We have to go through, we as leaders are going through this process too. And even to make it a little more meta, we may be going through this process about leading. So a lot of times leaders are very good doers. We were very good at our jobs, which is why we got promoted. And now we're an enthusiastic beginner about leading others. But don't you know, guess what's coming next? A disillusioned learner as leader. And so while you're trying to be supportive and coaching someone else, you're doubting yourself at the same time. So that's where these kinds of, training programs like the Leadership Learning Lab, because I'm biased, but others as well, give you that support and that highly supportive behavior that you need and also competence building, right? Getting better at the competence of being a leader and of these types of skills that people aren't born with. takes a little bit of training. So we're out of time for the day, but if this conversation got you thinking, go back, listen to part 1 of this series. It will be in the show notes if you haven't yet, and that'll give you a real good foundation for situational leadership. And if you want to apply this in your workplace, join us at the Leadership Learning Lab in the next cohort that's starting up, and we'll give you even more information on this, more hands-on learning, lots of forms and models that you can follow, and you'll learn a lot of good techniques and examples from those other leaders that are in your cohort. Thanks, Tatiana, for jumping in today and helping us clarify this.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, everybody, for listening. I'd like to give a special shout out to our podcast producer, Richard Francisco. Check out our notes for any details. And if you get anything out of this, please follow us. And if you enjoy it, please take a moment to rate us or write a comment. It will mean the world to us. We'd love to hear from you. And if you just can't get enough, follow me on TikTok and check out tlpnyc.com/podcast for more information.